So our final farewell to Genesis and Joseph
Until we meet again.
until
Yes.
we meet again. Well, for those who actually read Parashiot, you'll see these guys in the fall, after several months after Simchat Torah. So again, a reminder that in the red story, the Y story, the Judah, the southern kingdom, however, the inland, however we want to parse it out, we dealt with the relationship between Joseph and his brothers, and the preeminent brother had been Judah when there was a brother orientation, but the bulk of the focus has been the Joseph and Jacob orientation. But in the red story, we dealt with a lot of the interaction between Joseph and his brothers after he ended up saving them, having been their intention had been one, God's intention had been another. All of that played out in the red story. Remember, Jacob died once in the red story and died a second time in the blue story. In the red story following Jacob's death, he wanted to be buried with his fathers without any statement as to where that was. And that whole entourage of chariots and horsemen and everybody traveled up the west side of the Jordan River, up the Jordan side, across the Sinai, across above the Gulf of Eilat Aqaba, the inlet from the Red Sea, came up, ended up in a place that had, in later biblical times, an Egyptian name and was known as an Egyptian settlement. And according to that story, Jacob had been buried there. They then come home, and now in verse 21, they say to Joseph, previously last week, they said to Joseph, 2 weeks ago, they said to Joseph, Dad told us to make sure to command you not to take it out on us, all the bad stuff we did to you.
Wait, which story was that?
That's red. So red has returned from this Egyptian settlement across the Jordan from Canaan, and the brothers come back and they say, we just wanted to remind you, Dad commanded us to not take out all the bad stuff on us. And Joseph had said, why would I? You thought it was going to be for bad, but God thought it was going to be for good. And if it hadn't been for what you did to me, none of you would be alive today. You would have all died in the drought and famine. So he seems to have forgiven them. So now he continues saying that and says, Ve'ata al tira'u anochi achalkel etchem ve'et tapchem v'yenachem otam ve'daber al libam. So ve'ata, and now, al tira'u, do not be afeared. Do not be afraid. And speaking in the plural here, Anochi achalkel etchem. Achalkel, kalkala is nourishment, support. The things we look for in a lot of our prayers when we ask God to keep us alive, we say kalkala and parnasa. Parnasa is income, and kalkala is nourishment and support. You can have a lot of parnasa, and if there's nothing on the shelves of the stores, it doesn't do you any good. You can have a lot of stuff available in the store, but if you can't pay for it, it doesn't do you any good. So we're always asking for both. In this particular case, they don't need parnasah, they don't need income, because Joseph says, Anochi achalkel. Achalkel has the I, it's the future first person singular built into the verb. So the Anochi is actually irrelevant and is extraneous. So it's more for emphasis. Anochi, I, achalkel, I will nourish you. I will give you sustenance. And the Anochi is the formal. Ani is the informal. So Joseph is again speaking possibly more from a position of power, of authority. But I will support etchem, you, the et tapchem, and your little ones, that is your families. Now notice it switches from etchem and tapachem, which are the second person plural, to the next part of the verse, which is vayinachem otam, which is the third person plural. Thus we know where the quotation marks go in the text by the switch from second person to third person. Vayinachem otam, and he comforted them. Nacham is comfort. So he comforted them. Vayadaber al libam, and he spoke on literally their heart. So he's speaking to them, to their mind, to their heart, to their inner being, their essence.
How do you break that down by words?
Vayadaber, and he spoke al on libam, their lev, their heart, their inner essence, their minds. He's speaking directly to them in a more empathic or compassionate way. So we're told, Hivayinachem, so he's comforting them. Doesn't ever say actually that he forgives them. He comforts them. He says God had other plans, but that doesn't let you off the hook for what your intentions were. Verse 22, Vayeshev Yosef b'Mitzrayim, Hu uveit aviv, Vayechi Yosef mea ve'eser shanim. Vayeshev, he dwelled, he sat, he settled, that is Joseph, b'Mitzrayim, in Egypt. So he settled back down in Egypt. Notice he's not in Goshen. He comforts his brothers, he supports them, he gives them hope, he comforts them, and then he goes back to the palace, apparently. Because it doesn't say Vayeshev Yosef b'Goshen, but rather Vayeshev Yosef b'Mitzrayim. He, that is, Hu uveit aviv, he and the house of his father. So maybe he's in Goshen, which is part of Egypt. Maybe he's in Egypt, and they're in Goshen, which is part of Egypt. That he and his house of his father, and it doesn't say what they did. The Vayeshev is a singular. He did it. But Beit Aviv, we're not really told what they did. They settled also. They settled back down. Vayechi Yosef, and the life of Joseph, Mea ve'eser, 110 shanim, years. This is a little bit of a breaking of the pattern that we generally see, where it's Mea shana, 100 year, ve'eser shanim, and 10 years. Here it's Mea ve'eser shanim, 110 years. Now to the blue story.
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
The fact that he said that he settled in Egypt, he and his father's house, doesn't that mean that he and his brothers returned to Egypt? Because aren't they the progeny of all the people who followed?
If you want.
The ancestors, the ancestors.
If you like.
Okay.
Again, pointing out that the Hebrew is ambiguous as to where the Beit Aviv did what. It says he settled, and the house of his father, Beit Aviv, and we're not really told whether that's part of the Vayeshev b'Mitzrayim, or that's simply Vayeshev, and they also settled. We're not given a verb. If we're not given a verb, we don't know quite what to do with the subject.
And what's Vayit?
Vayechi,
Vayahi, yeah.
and he lived. From Chai.
Maya. Yeah.
Vayechi, and he lived, that is Yosef,
Yeah,
he lived 110 years.
yep.
So Vayeshev is singular then.
Exactly.
I see. He settled.
There's a dot in the yud. Why is that?
Because the yud is doubled to let you know that the first part of the yud is the future tense, and the second part of the yud is the root of the word yeshev. Yoshev. To sit or dwell. Without the yud, it would be and he returned by Yashuv.
Hmm.
But
The yud would not be part of the root.
so how do you say it?
Vayeshev.
Vayeshev.
Accent the yud.
Ayesha.
Notice, by the way, Joseph doesn't die, he just lived.
Sam, and that's about the 110 years. How does one, as a modern reader, kind of get over the incredulousness? Like, what are the interpretations of 110 years of life for, someone who lived in biblical times?
Okay, so in biblical times, once we get into more realistic lifespans, then which really starts with Joseph and then Moses. Moses lives 120.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to be told that 120 was the ideal maximum age of a human being. The psalmist is going to remind us that we're lucky if we can make it to 70 or 80.
But I just
Right.
took a course that said that they figured out that actually 120 is not so way off.
No, it's as a matter of fact, the oldest living accurately recorded person made it just barely to 121.
Yeah. Yeah.
About 40 years ago, when I was working in geriatric chaplaincy and attended one of my early conferences on Alzheimer's, at that time, there was a projection of the percentage of people who would contract Alzheimer's, who would have some form of Alzheimer's or related dementia. And the chart went up to the percentages around the age 80 when it was 50-50. And early onset Alzheimer's was part of that. And there was actually a curve that went from around 50s or 60s up to 80, where it hit 180, where it hit 50-50. At the time, I remember asking the presenter whether any research had been done in the post-80 population, which at that time, 40 years ago, there were so few people over 100 that everybody who worked in nursing homes could tell you who in their population was over 100. And we actually had a gentleman in the Hebrew rehab who entered Hebrew rehab at the age of 98, and his chart said he was 98 when he entered. 15 years later,
Oh, my God.
when he died, it said allegedly 113.
Yeah.
So somehow, over the course of the 15 years, he only allegedly lived 15 more years. But by 20 years ago, people had to check their records and their charts to find out who and how many were over 100. But extrapolating that particular curve, since I came from a science math background in college
Thank you.
and prior, I extrapolated the curve and it hit 100% at 120.
Wow.
Yeah, they've shown that now. This class I took, it showed that that's what's a lot of scientific formulas are showing that.
Yeah, well, actually, the research since then, I went to an Alzheimer's conference about 10 or so years ago, and the research has shown that the curve actually flattens out.
But so are you saying that they might have whether or not he lived, when they told the story of their lives, that there were people living to 120 in our terms?
Very unlikely, but there are people living into their 80s and 90s,
Mhm.
even 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago.
Hmm.
We have records of people who lived in their 80s and 90s, and so it wasn't that far off to think that they might make it to 100 and something, an early 100. And there may have been. I haven't really researched longevity in ancient times, even 1,500, 2,000 years ago, but there might have been the rare person who lived to be 100 or so.
Mhm.
So 110, 120 wasn't that far off. And 120 just happens to be a perfect number
Ah.
because it's 3 40s.
Mhm.
Mhm.
3 is a great number. 6 is a perfect number. 12, all those things that have more divisors than any other number. It's why we use 60, because the Mesopotamian culture liked 60. It was a great number. You could divide it up into lots of different parts.
Yeah.
So 120 is twice 60. It's 3 times 40. Those are all good numbers. So the 120 was much more symbolic. And Moses lived to be 120, and Moses, the only biblical figure with a so-called historical age that high.
Mhm.
Everybody else doesn't make it to 120.
How about the 800-year-old person?
Yeah, Aaron only made it to 110. Joseph only made it to 110. Others die earlier. So you don't quite make it to perfect except for Moses. And thus the Yiddish blessing or anti-curse, whenever you say something about a person's life, you should always include bis 120 Yor. Or in Hebrew, ad mea ve'esrim.
What is
You
that?
should live to be 120.
Would you allow?
How old are you? Nobody would say, I'm 80. They would say in Yiddish shorthand, I'm 80, I should live to be 120.
Life expectancy keeps getting longer and longer. Maybe a lot of people will.
So, but Joseph, meanwhile, only makes it to 110.
All right.
So he stuck around a while. Now the blue story, which, remember, the blue story had nothing about the relationship between Joseph and his brothers, but rather Joseph and Jacob through his sons Ephraim and Manasseh. The red story, you will recall back in the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob red stories, there was never any cave of Machpelah story in any red story about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The cave of Machpelah is only in blue stories of Abraham and ultimately Isaac and Jacob. So the blue story we had up through 2 weeks ago, Jacob says to Joseph, bury me in the cave of Machpelah that my father Abraham bought from the Hittite in the field of the Hittites, and on and all of that. And they go up and they bury him, and then they come back. And remember, in the blue story, Jacob was embalmed before they went on the trip.
Mhm.
Vayar Yosef, verse 23, LeEphraim b'nei Shleshim gam b'nei Machir ben Menashe yuldu al birkei Yosef. Nothing about his brothers. They come back from burying Jacob, and the next thing we have is Joseph in relationship to his children and his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren. So Vayar Yosef, and Joseph saw LeEphraim, to Ephraim, B'nai Shileshim, the sons of 3 generations. Literally the sons of 3nesses. Shalosh 3, Shileshim 3nesses. So shorthand for 3 generations. So he sees his family, his offspring from Ephraim down through 3 generations.
Mhm.
Gam b'nei Machir, and also the sons of Machir, who was Ben Menashe, who was the son of Menashe. Thus Machir is the grandson of Joseph, and the Bnei Machir are the great-grandsons, great-grandchildren of Joseph on Menashe's side. So he sees 3 generations on Ephraim's side, and he sees 3 generations on Menashe's side. And again, interestingly, we are not told the names at this point of the grandchildren or great-grandchildren of Joseph on Ephraim's side, just that they hung around. But one specific line on Menashe's side was Machir. Machir, the grandson, Yuldul al Birkei Yosef, the children of Machir were born, Yuldu, they were born, the passive, al Birkei Yosef, on the knees of Joseph.
Hmm.
Joseph gets to bounce his great-grandchildren on his knee.
Oh, is that Barche is knees?
Berech is knee.
Berech.
Remember Berech, Baracha? The
Mm.
blessing and the knee are related
Oh.
words. Birkei, literally the knees of. So he got to hold his great-grandsons on his lap as they were circumcised. Which it, by the way, never says. But the commentaries could say, what were they doing on his knees? Well, obviously, he was the Sandek. He was the godparent who holds the child while the circumcision is done. So he's a pretty sprightly 110-year-old with his great-grandchildren. 24. Vayomer Yosef el Echav, Anochi met, Velohim pakod yifkod etchem, Vehe'elah etchem min haaretz hazot, el haaretz asher nishba la'Avraham, liYitzchak, u'liYaakov. So Joseph's relationship to his brothers here is very different from his relationship to his brothers in all of the red story. Verse 24, Vayomer Yosef el Echav. Joseph says to his brothers. Again, we don't get a statement of whether he has to go to see them, whether he sends messengers, whether he's already there with them. We have the wonderful ambiguity of after we given all this information, the information we would like, we don't get. So what does he say to his brothers? Anochi met. I dead. I am dying. I will be dead. Again, how do you translate just Anochi met? Very unlikely that he actually said, I'm dead. So I will encounter death. Velohim pakod yifkod etchem. And Elohim, pakod yifkod. Pakad is a visiting.
Oh, visiting.
Is what?
So pakod yifkod, in visiting, God will visit.
Again,
So etchem, you. God will come to you, visit you. God's come to me a lot of times. Now God will come to you. God will surely visit you. Doesn't say when. The he'elah etchem, he'elah, the oleg going up, he'elah, the causative, the hifil, and God will cause you to go up or bring you up, etchem, bring you up. God will cause you to go up, min ha'aretz hazot, from this land, el haaretz asher nishba la'Avraham liYitzchak u'liYaakov. God will bring you min haaretz hazot, from this land, bring you up, el haaretz, to the land, asher nishba, that God swore LaAvraham, LeYitzchak, ULYaakov, God swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob.
So the Nishba is swore?
Yes, Nishba,
Sheva.
Sheva, Shavua,
What's the nun?
an oath. God gave an oath to your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and God will remember that, and God will take you out of this land and bring you up to that land that God promised, swore, made an oath to Abraham, to Isaac, and Jacob.
All the brothers are older than Joseph, so
Exactly.
God's going to come.
So
Joseph,
yeah, who's he really
died.
talking to here? So the heirs of his brothers, perhaps, or one would translate it as his brethren. And you know that the feminine form of brethren is cistern. So in the red, there's a lot of guilt, a lot of comforting, a lot of promise of support of this generation. In the blue, there's no comforting, there's no guilt, and there's only promises to the generations to come.
Mm.
Without a
Say
statement,
that sentence again.
there's no, the blue story has nothing, any promises, any guilt, any comforting, any support to the Joseph generation. It's all about the future generations. That in the future, God will visit them in God's own time and bring them up from this land that they are currently living in to the land that was sworn to their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Without a time frame. When will this happen? We're not given that.
In God's good time.
In God's own time.
Yep, yep.
So meanwhile, just hang out here in Goshen, you and your children and your grandchildren. And we're not told where Ephraim and Manasseh and their children and grandchildren, etc., are living. Are they still in the palace? Are they then heading back to Goshen eventually?
What is the meaning of Atzmoti?
Oh, we haven't gotten there. That's first.
okay.
We're just about to start 25. Right now, Jacob is just putting an obligation upon his brethren that God will remember them. And so therefore, the alternate side, the other side of the contract that's being established, Vayashba Yosef. Vayashba is he caused to swear. So he caused an oath at Bnei Yisrael to the children of Israel. Now they are not his brothers, they are the Bnei Yisrael. So again, even more clearly, the Achav in the previous verse are his brethren, his collateral family. So Bnei Yisrael, he makes all of the people of Israel, the children of Israel, the offspring of Jacob, Israel, and he causes them to swear. So God gave an oath to their ancestors. Now he's exacting an oath from them. And this is what it is, Lamor, as follows, saying, Pakod yifkod Elohim etchem v'ha'alitem et atzmotai mizeh. So Pakod yifkod Elohim, God will surely visit. In visiting, God will visit, he will visit, etchem, you. So God will show up again. V'ha'alitem, and cause to go up you, cause you all to go up, bring you up.
Where's the
So
bring?
therefore now you, ha'ali, you will bring up. So God, when God brings you up, v'ha'alitem et atzmotai mizeh, you will bring up. So when God brings you up, v'ha'alitem, you will bring up, you will cause to bring up, et atzmotai. Etzem is the bones,
Oh, the
the
bones.
cadaver.
So he does die first.
Can you go through those words again?
Yes. So going back to Vayashba Yosef et Bnei Yisrael. So Joseph exacts an oath from the Bnei Yisrael
Mhm.
as follows. Pakod yifkod Elohim etchem. God will visit you. God will reappear. God will show up again. And as I said, God will cause you to go up. So v'ha'alitem et atzmotai, and you will bring up, when you are going up, you will bring up, you will cause to go up, atzmotai, my bones, my skeleton, my remains.
My time.
And
Exactly.
etzem, by the way, is the image also, the etzem Elohim. We are created way back in Genesis.
Wait,
But Adam, in looking at Chava, says she's etzem of my etzem.
but is he saying that Joseph, the bones of Joseph or the bones of God?
The bones of Joseph.
Yeah, okay, Joseph.
God will bring you all up, and when God brings you up, you will keep with you, you will bring up with you, atzmotai mizeh, my bones from here, from this place.
Is,
In other words, we took Jacob up and buried him when he died up in the ancestral home.
Mhm.
Me, I'll hang around. My cadaver will hang around with you until you all leave and then take me with you. So don't take me up and bury me now. Keep me around until you leave,
Mhm.
whenever that will happen. And then ha'alitem, you will bring up et atzmotai mizeh, my bones from here, my essence. Yes.
is pakod a modern Hebrew word for visit? Isn't there some other word?
Well, it's a special kind of visiting. We have it much more liturgically, but pekudah is a visitor, a visiting. And finally, the last verse of Genesis. Vayamot Yosef ben Mea va'eser shanim, vayachan tu oto, vayisem ba'aron b'mitzrayim. So 26, Vayamot Yosef, and he dies again. He died in verse 22. He died, well, actually, in verse 22, he just stops living. In verse 26, he actually dies. And he dies, coincidentally, ben mea va'eser shanim, at literally the son of 110 years, or 110 years old. So
Why
he
would you be
dies,
this? Why would you be the son of 110?
it says ben mea va'eser.
I would say
No,
that.
I know, but why that expression?
Well, why old? Why 110 years old?
No, but the
I mean,
Ben.
that's just the way
I mean,
you
the
say it.
word Ben, the word son is what I'm questioning.
That's the word that they used when they wanted to say how old someone was.
Okay.
But
They even
Because
use
remember, Ben is not just the son literally, but the heir, the inheritor of. So he's now the inheritor of 110 years. And what do? Vayachan tu oto, they embalm him. And they take the embalmed mummy remains. Vayisem ba'aron b'mitzrayim, and the word aron is the word for an ark,
well,
whether you're taking it on a boat or putting it on a bunch of poles and carrying it around. It's also the word in modern Hebrew for a closet.
But not a coffin?
And it's the word for a coffin.
Mhm, okay.
It's a container,
container. Yeah.
that's why I translate it that way. They put him in some sort of container in Egypt.
Egyptian mummy.
Yeah, exactly. Joseph becomes an Egyptian mummy. And they don't tell you at the end of Genesis what they did with that Aron, with that coffin, with that embalmed container.
He brought his bones up.
In Exodus, we'll find that out. In Genesis, they embalm him and tuck him away in a closet.
That's a pretty,
So the children, Bnei Israel, when they lived in Egypt, had at least one skeleton in their closet.
it's like the death of Joseph is a climax in a way, but then it's sort of anticlimactic that they just put him away.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, the climax of the Red story was he lived.
Yeah.
The climax of the Blue story is he dies and they tuck him away someplace.
Yep. Well, it was like in the past when they would carry the bones of someone that died around, I guess, to bury them in a certain spot.
Well, that's what they did in the Red story with Jacob, remember?
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
took the bones up with them to bury him up in the across the Jordan. And in the Blue story, they took Jacob up and buried him in the cave of Machpelah.
Do you think it was always really bones, or could it have been cremation? Do we know that it was actually bones and not?
Hmm.
Well, I mean, if it's embalming, it's not cremating.
Embalming,
Right.
yeah.
If it's not embalming, it's burying quickly in the ground. So, yeah, we don't get any cremation stories in the Torah, or certainly honorific cremation stories. You know, if you got cremated, usually were a blasphemer or a sorceress or some other antisocial element. And that's not till we get to Leviticus and all that other good stuff that we're in the readings right now. So, June 22nd, review and preview. On the calendar of TBZ on June 22nd is a whole batch of material for June, July, and August. And it's going to be a little bit different format as we review the creation stories side by side and the flood stories side by side. It's going to be geared towards two different kinds of students, one where there is Hebrew and one where there is not Hebrew reading capacity or fluency. The two elements will come together for a shared purpose of examining the parallelism of the two stories, the creation stories and the flood stories, and the differences between that may have indicated sociological or cultural differences between the communities that told the two stories. And will also be, as we always do, look at when they're combined, the greater story is, the full story is greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
So that we get a combined community from disparate origins. And the way you're going to be looking at that material when we come to that will be like this. You're going to get a batch of material for those who want to do reading fluency, which is just one page. Even though it looks like more, it's still one page of the same size font we've been using. So one page of reading practice. And then when we come together as a group, we'll be actually looking more at the English
Mm.
than the Hebrew. Will be, you'll have, if for those who really want to just pile on the Hebrew, you have lots of more Hebrew text. Notice it's one page of a lot smaller font. And it's only, I've divided the two creation stories into two sets of parallel six parallel steps. And in the first week, we only get the first two steps. So it's going to take us 3 weeks just to get through the 6 steps of creation. But if you look at the English, you'll see that I've discovered, hypothesized, whatever it is I've done to this stuff, that there are, in fact, in the first chapter, 6 steps, but that was easy because it said evening and morning, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, through day 6. However, I found a different way of dividing up the 6 steps, because there are also 6 times that it says ki tov. So I now will have divided the steps into 6 ki tov steps rather than 6 day steps.
Hmm.
And it is, in a sense, as Jeffrey was pointing out, for those who are more scientifically oriented, it's not a bad estimation of the Big Bang Theory.
Hmm.
What I feel will demonstrate is that the 6 steps of the chapter 2 are the 6 steps of going from chaos to order in the creation of tamed agriculture. Because we're going to have things like irrigation, working and weeding the land. So that's what we have to look forward to starting June 22nd.
So could I just could you show that again, just to understand how you're looking at it?
Again, if you,
one column.
actually, you can open up all of the material.
But you're reading from, like, if you were reading it consecutively, you'd be reading everything that says 1 to the end and then going to the left, right?
Right, you could say, well, or you can read, yes. So the first step in moving from chaos to order in the coastal region was, remember, I'm out in my boat in the dark, in the middle of the sea, in a storm. First step of placing order on that chaos would be, at least there's some light to see by.
Yeah.
And then the next step was, oh, the water's up above is staying up above, and the water down below is staying down below, and I've got this big bubble of air in between.
But I guess I was asking another question. If I wanted to see how these were put together, I'd start with like the 1-1, and then I'd read to.
Well, if you want to see how they're put together, you would actually go through the entire EP, open several different screens of, or separate different versions of the story. Read 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, and see how Genesis 1 goes from chaos to order step by step.
Right, but when
For a coastal people.
looking at your 2 columns,
So if you want to then,
right?
but the coastal people don't define chaos the same as the inland people, and therefore don't define order as the same as the inland people. So you would trace the 6 steps of the coastal people, and then you would trace the 6 steps of the inland people. If you want to see them parallel, what's the first step for the coastal people? Oh, light. And notice I have precursors to creation. So prior to step 1 is chaos, wind, water, and darkness. And by the way, I chose to translate tohu vavohu as chaos and bedlam. If you want to know what the inland people think is ultimate chaos, it's the first 2 verses of up there. There's no plants, there's no grass, there's nothing growing, there's no dew, no water on the ground, and no people anywhere to work the ground. That's chaos. You have just wilderness, empty, barren, rock and sand wilderness.
I guess
Step 1, irrigation. Step 1 of the coastal people was light. Step 1 of the inland people is water. Step 2 in the coastal people was air, no water, Interestingly enough, the second step in the coastal people is get rid of the water. Have some non-water space between the water below, the ocean down here, and the water above the clouds and the sky above. For the inland people, the first step is bring water. The second step was then, now that there's water in the land, we need somebody to actually make the water work for us as we domesticate the wild into agriculture.
But these numbers, I guess this is what I'm trying to understand. What are the Roman and the other
The
numbers
Roman numerals are the steps.
but these are your numbers, right? They're
My
not,
numbers, they're the Indo-Arabic are the verse numbers. I've divided the creation story into 6 steps was easy in Genesis 1 because we had an apparent 6 steps already there. The problem there was we had 2 sets of 6 steps that didn't actually match. So I'm looking at it now from a different 2 steps.
and so if there's a Roman number to a regular number 8 on both sides, are they
Well,
both?
the Roman number 2 is so in this story, step 2 takes 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 5 verses.
Oh,
But some of those verses,
Step 1 takes 3 verses.
yes, but I'm just trying to understand the relationship between, for instance, if you have step 2 and you have all these verses, you have some of the same numbers on the left column. Are they from the same Hebrew verse, but in two
Well,
different?
notice that step 2 starts with chapter 2, that this left side starts with chapter 2. Those are all verses in chapter 2.
Okay.
These are all verses in chapter 1.
Okay.
So
I
the
see.
verses have nothing to do with each other on either side. But step 1 in chapter 1 takes 3 verses. Step 1 in chapter 2 only takes 1 verse. Step 2 in chapter 1 takes 5 verses. Step 2 in chapter 2 only takes 2 verses.
Got it.
But each step is a step of added order onto the chaos, which was defined by the opening verses of the chapter. So yes, we're going to be spending 45 minutes doing exactly that with this text starting June 22nd. Once we've established that, we'll then do what's 629, which is the next couple of steps. And they're all posted on the website. So if you go to the calendar, you can actually open it to any one of the pages from June 22nd on, and you will get all of the material from June 22nd through the end of August.
Right now you can get it?
Right now you can get it.
Oh, boy.
And you will notice that some weeks have multiple sets of material because some of the material is for the reading people, and those steps are called, and here, let's do one more quick share, show you the calendar. So if you go to the calendar, this is the June 22nd page of the calendar. You'll see the material is here. If you click on that, you will see June, July, and August. June has material for June 22nd and June 29th. July, material for July 6, 13, 20, and 27. And if you open one, for example, you will find that sometimes there's one piece of material.
And just so people,
Sometimes there's a whole bunch of material. And
people shouldn't, Rabbi, get confused by the right-hand column with the dates that you put it
right,
on.
that's when it's posted.
Right.
That was when, right-hand column is simply when it was posted. The thing itself actually gives you the date. And you notice on July 13, we have a reading fluency practice time, and we have 2 sets of readings because the post-creation story in Genesis, in the Y story, is significantly long enough it needs its own page. And the EP post-creation story is actually very short, and the EP and the editor redactor. So all of the material is there, and you can read ahead in the English and see how it's divided up. But in the creation stories, Roman numerals indicate the steps from chaos to order within each of the stories.
Well, thank you for all your work, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Indo-Arabic numbers tell us what verse in that chapter we're in.
So I'm just wondering, if we do the fluency reading, what do the people who aren't doing the reading do at that time?
They join us at 11:15 when we start the actual study.
Oh, okay.
Yes, you'll notice it's divided up into preparation, breakout rooms, and then study. So those who don't want to either read or listen to Hebrew read can join in at 11:15.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Those who
have a
want to
good
practice
few
reading.
Well,
should
you
join
did
in
a
at
lot of work
10:30.
setting
Will
this up.
you read, will you read them, when you just read it, not, will you read that at the beginning of
Yes, I'll be
today's
reading that
class
in the
or at the
15.
end of the previous one?
Right, I'll be reading the reading fluency part before I send you to breakout rooms to read it with each other.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Well, have a great few weeks, everyone.